So the way we would tend to think about this is that leaders are more associated with things like vision, strategy in the long term, innovation, managing the environment around the organization. So those sorts of aspects of leadership, I guess you'd call it. Whereas managers are concerned with making the system run, keeping the current system running, making things work more efficiently or effectively, running the sort of performance management and monitoring of the organization. In other words, much more humdrum, mundane type of aspects of what people do inside an organization. And the key difference there, I always think of it as being, increasingly we think of leadership as being about how the organization is going to adapt and innovate, how it's going to change, whereas managers seem to be those people who are much more focused around the present and maintenance and continuity of the present. But as I said, I think this is a very false and artificial divide, which isn't that helpful, because I think about it in both ways. First of all, in practice, I think anybody who's managing, and they're managing people, to some extent is leading them. In other words, they've got a relationship which is between leader and followers. And if they're going to be effective, they've got to manage that relationship. And leadership essentially there is about direction. And anybody who's managing people has to give a sense of direction and engage with people so that they want to follow. So there's a sort of element of leadership in the management job. And then on the other side, I think that it's ridiculous to think that leaders don't manage as well. Even at the level of, say, the chief executive of an organization, the chief executive is going to spend an awful lot of time managing. They're going to be thinking about the performance of the organization. They're going to be working with people on day-to-day, relatively routine stuff, as well as trying to think about the things that chief executives do when they focus on the future. So for me, although the essence of leadership may be around change and the essence of management may be around maintaining the existing system, I think it's a worryingly artificial divide if you think leaders do one thing and managers do another. There's a lot of sort of overlap. It's like a Venn diagram. There's a lot of overlap in practice. This is one where it's not like you can say, well, people start to emerge when they're 27 or 33. Excuse me. In practice, it's so contingent upon the situation and the challenges that they're facing. I think what I would say is that we normally don't put people into leadership positions of any substance, usually until they're in their 30s. And that's when the tests really become demanding. And so what I would tend to assume is that between, say, the ages of early 30s through to, say, mid 40s, that's when leadership development is taking place very intensively. But that's a generalization, and around that, what you can find is, first of all, in particular with the emphasis on entrepreneurial organizations, and people starting businesses or being thrown into the sort of deep end much earlier in their lives, it's not uncommon for people to be really picking up sort of their first leadership challenge, formally or informally, in their mid-20s. And so there's no, as it were, hard, fast rule that says you can't be a leader when you're 25 or even when you're younger than that. It's whether you can respond to the situation around you. So the sort of entrepreneurship and has forced that upon us. But then on the other side, what I think we shouldn't forget is that in many ways as well, I think there's opportunities for people to come through later on in their career. I've certainly worked with people who, only in their 40s, maybe even their 50s, really have grasped the nettle in terms of saying, well, I want to be a leader, or I can lead others. They're what you might call as late developers, or they're people who've never had the chance and the opportunity or thought themselves capable. And again, I think one interesting thing about this, for example, is where more and more women have come back to work after they've had families, and they've got what we call second careers or second parts of their career. And they're coming back having had some time out, so they're a bit older and so on, and wiser. And it's then that they take up the leadership challenge. But So it may be only in their late 30s, 40s when they get the first opportunity, but then they make the most of it. And so you can see all sorts of reasons why the old idea of leadership comes through at a particular point because careers are much more fixed and stable is breaking down. And you can see leadership development occurring very early, also relatively late in your careers. So I think the lesson is basically, don't think you're ever too old, as it were, or too young to be a leader. For me, there are 2 or 3 aspects to this that are really critical in terms of learning to be a leader. The first one is experience. There's no doubt this is a sort of a role or an aspect of life where you have to do it by playing it. You can't learn it out of books. You can learn some things out of the books, but you've got to go out there and do it. So experience counts for something. Secondly, I think you can teach some leadership skills and behaviors, and that's in a sense what you do on MBA programs or in executive education. And so experience and learning can take place, learning in the classroom. And then the third thing that I think is really important for this is actually reflection. So whether it's by experience or whether it's happened through the classroom or ideally a combination of those things, where leadership really comes into its own is actually through me or you, me reflecting on myself, anybody else reflecting on what they are doing as a leader, what their style is, what are the things they do well as a leader, what are the things they could change. And in particular, what happens is that with that last point, people get into styles or doing things as a leader and then they don't adapt. And yet self-reflection means that you can sometimes say, maybe I could do that in different ways. And so those 3 things, experience, formal learning and reflection are really the keys to learning how to be a leader. And virtually anybody can lead, because essentially roles in life outside of work have some leadership capacity. There are some people who do not want to be a leader. They don't want to be thrust into the role, they don't have the confidence and things like that. And there are some people who more naturally take to it. But that doesn't mean to say you can't learn this and learn a lot about how to become an effective leader.